Here's the story you already know. Two guys named Steve, a garage in Los Altos, a company built to put a dent in the universe. A company that doesn't chase markets, it makes things so good that markets bend around them. The aluminum carved from a single block. The box that opens with a soft, engineered sigh. The typeface chosen by a man who studied calligraphy. Apple is not a technology company, the story goes. It is a design house that happens to ship electronics, and it charges a premium because the premium is earned, and you pay it gladly because the thing in your pocket is the closest a mass-produced object has ever come to art, and people believe it. They camp outside the stores. They line up in the rain for a phone that is, spec for spec, a modest improvement on the phone they already own. They defend the company in arguments the way you defend a football team. Apple has done something almost no corporation in history has managed. It has convinced hundreds of millions of people that buying its products is an expression of who they are. That is the romance. A company of pure taste, selling beautiful objects to people who appreciate beauty, and getting rich because good work deserves reward. And the company tends this story with the same obsessive care it gives the products. The keynote staged like theater. The stores built like cathedrals with the glass staircases and the reverent lighting. Retail spaces designed so that buying a charger feels like a pilgrimage. The word magical deployed without irony. The relentless emphasis on privacy, on craft, on the human being at the center of the technology. It is one of the most disciplined and expensive acts of storytelling in the history of business. And it works because most of it is true. The products really are good. The care really is there. That is what makes the decoy so effective. It is not a lie. It is a true story told loudly enough to keep you from noticing the other story, the quieter one, running underneath it where the actual money moves. It is a lovely story. It is also, in the ways that actually move the money, a decoy. Because here is a number that doesn't fit the story. Every year, Google pays Apple somewhere in the region of $20 billion. Not for a product, not for a chip, or a screen, or a factory line. Google pays Apple $20 billion a year for a checkbox. Specifically, for the privilege of being the default search engine in Safari, the thing that happens automatically when you type into the address bar and never think about it again. That payment came to light in the antitrust trial in the United States, and the figure landed like a brick through a window because $20 billion is more than most companies on Earth earn in total. And Apple books it as almost pure profit. There is no factory behind it. There is no shipping, no returns, no warranty. It is a toll collected once a year for a decision you made without knowing you made it. Now hold that number next to the romance and watch the romance crack. Apple's hardware, the phones, the laptops, the watches, the objects the story is built around, carries a gross margin of roughly 35%. Respectable. But Apple's services business, the App Store, iCloud, the search deal, Apple Music, the warranties, the payments, runs at a gross margin closer to 70%. Double. And that services business now throws off somewhere north of $85 billion a year in revenue, growing while the hardware plateaus. So the truth underneath the aluminum is this. Apple is not, in the sense that matters to its bank account, a company that sells you objects. It is a company that uses objects to install a toll booth in your life and then quietly collects for as long as you live inside the ecosystem. The phone is the bait. The rent is the business. Put the whole thing in scale for a second, because the numbers are almost hard to hold in your head. Apple pulls in around $390 billion of revenue in a year and keeps something near $100 billion of it as net profit. $100 billion. That is more than the entire economic output of most countries, earned by a single company, most of it flowing back out to shareholders. And the composition of that profit is quietly shifting under the surface every single year. A decade ago, the iPhone was the whole story. The object was the company. Today, the fastest growing and most profitable slice is the part you can't hold, can't drop, can't queue for in the rain. The romance was built around a product. The profit is migrating toward a subscription. And most people holding the stock, and almost everyone holding the phone, have not noticed the switch. So let's talk about what it actually costs to be this company. Not the sticker price of a phone, the cost of the position. Because the instinct, when you see margins like these, is to think anyone could do it. Build a nice phone, add a store, charge a toll, And the reason nobody has is the most expensive and least visible asset Apple owns. Start with the obvious spend. Apple pours around $30 billion a year into research and development. That alone is larger than the entire revenue of most companies you could name. But the R&D is not the moat. The moat is the installed base. There are more than 2.2 billion active Apple devices on the planet. Over a billion of them are iPhones, in the hands of over a billion people, and every one of those people has spent years pouring their life into the machine. Their photos, their messages, their passwords, their music, their muscle memory. To leave, they don't just buy a different phone. They abandon a decade of accumulated self. That switching cost is the real product, and Apple did not buy it. It grew it, one default setting at a time, and it cannot be purchased at any price by a competitor. Then there is the supply chain, and here Apple has run a magic trick in plain sight. It does not own the factories. The assembly happens in enormous plants run by Foxconn and others, employing hundreds of thousands of workers Apple never has to put on its balance sheet. What Apple owns is the tooling, the designs, and the purchase orders, which means it captures the margin of a manufacturer while carrying almost none of the risk of one. When demand drops, the pain lands on the supplier. When a component gets cheap, Apple keeps the savings. It has all the leverage of the biggest buyer in the world and none of the exposure of the biggest builder. The capital that a normal manufacturer would sink into concrete and machines, Apple keeps. And what does it do with the money it keeps? This is the cost nobody counts because it isn't a cost, it's the engine wearing a disguise. Apple spends on the order of $90 billion a year buying back its own stock. Not building things, not acquiring rivals. Buying its own shares off the market and destroying them. Since it began the program in earnest, Apple has spent well over $500 billion this way. More money returned to shareholders through buybacks than most companies will ever be worth. And notice what it does not do with that money. It does not go on the great acquisition sprees its rivals do. It rarely buys another giant. Its purchases are small, quiet, absorbed, a team here, a technology there. The cash does not go hunting for the next business. It goes back to the owners, and it goes into propping up the per-share numbers, which tells you something the marketing never will. This is a company that has quietly concluded the smartest thing it can do. With $100 billion is hand it back because it can no longer reliably find something inside itself worth that much to build. Hold that thought because it matters more than it looks, and we'll come back to it. First, we have to name the engine directly because everything so far has been circling it. The engine is this. Apple sells you a piece of hardware exactly once at a premium, and the entire purpose of that sale is not the profit on the object. It is to acquire you. The iPhone is a customer acquisition device dressed as a luxury good. The moment it's in your hand, the real business begins, and the real business is renting you back the things the phone made necessary. The phone shipped with barely enough free storage, so you rent iCloud, a few dollars a month, forever, for storage that costs Apple almost nothing. Look closely at that free tier, 5 gigabytes. It has been 5 gigabytes for over a decade, while the phones learned to shoot in formats that eat that 5 gigabytes in an afternoon. That number has not moved because it was never meant to move. It is not a generous starting gift that fell behind the times. It is a tripwire, calibrated so that a normal person with a normal camera roll hits the wall within weeks and quietly starts paying, and keeps paying month after month, for the rest of the time they own an Apple device. The cheapest way to make a billion people pay you rent is to give them just slightly too little of something they cannot bear to lose. Every app you buy, every subscription you sign up for inside an app, Apple takes a cut, historically 30%, for the crime of standing between the developer and you. Think about what that 30% actually is. Apple did not write the app. Apple did not dream it up, staff it, market it, or maintain it. A developer somewhere spent years building something people want, and at the moment of sale, a third of the money is lifted off the top before the person who made the thing sees a cent. Not because Apple added a third of the value, but because Apple owns the only door into the building. There is no other way onto an iPhone. No rival store, historically, no side entrance. If you want to reach a billion of the highest spending customers on the planet, you pay the doorman, and the doorman sets the rate. That is not a commission for a service rendered. That is a tax levied by a landlord who owns the only road to the market. And for 15 years, it was simply the cost of existing on the platform. Apple Music, Apple TV, Apple Care. A slice of every tap of Apple Pay. And on top of it all, the Google check, arriving once a year for a search bar you never chose. This is a toll road, and the design of it is deliberate down to the color of a text bubble. When your message turns blue, that is not an aesthetic accident. That is social pressure engineered into the operating system. The green bubble marks the outsider, the person on the other platform, and Apple has fought for years to keep it that way, because every teenager who doesn't want the green bubble is a customer locked in by their own friend group. That is not design. That is a moat with a paint job. And here is the part that makes it beautiful in the cold sense. The mix. Every year, services grows as a share of Apple's profit, and services earns twice the margin of hardware, which means Apple can hold the price of the iPhone almost flat, look generous, let you feel like you're getting more for your money, and still expand its profit because the profit is increasingly coming from the toll, not the object. The hardware can stop growing entirely, and the money can keep climbing, as long as the installed base keeps paying rent. Apple has decoupled its earnings from its products. Read that again. The thing everyone thinks the company is, a maker of phones, can stall completely, and the machine keeps printing. Now come back to the buybacks, because this is where the financial engineering closes the loop. When Apple spends $90 billion buying its own shares and destroying them, the total profit gets divided among fewer and fewer slices. Earnings per share, the number Wall Street actually prices, goes up, even if the company earned not one extra dollar. It is growth you can manufacture in a spreadsheet. A company whose underlying business is maturing can, through sheer force of buyback, keep delivering the rising per-share numbers that a growth stock is supposed to deliver. It is not fraud. It is entirely legal, and Apple does it at a scale no one else can match. But it means the growth story you're being sold is, in part, an arithmetic trick performed on the denominators. So that is the machine. Bait with an object, lock in with a lifetime of switching costs, rent them through a toll road, tilt the margin mix toward the toll, and paper over any slowdown with the largest buyback program in corporate history. It is one of the most efficient wealth extraction systems ever assembled. Which raises the obvious question. If it's this good, what could possibly break it? And the answer is that the very things that make it so profitable are the things pointing guns at it. Start with the toll itself, because the toll is illegal adjacent, and everyone in a courtroom knows it. The 30% App Store cut has been dragged through litigation on multiple continents. Epic Games went to war over it. The European Union's Digital Markets Act has already begun forcing Apple to allow other app stores and outside payment systems, which is a polite regulatory way of saying stop collecting the toll. In the United States, a court ordered Apple to let developers point their users to cheaper payment options outside the App Store. And when Apple tried to keep a cut anyway, a judge came back harder, in language that read less like a ruling and more like a warning. Every one of these fights chips at the same wall. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic collapse, but crack by crack, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, each ruling making the next one easier. And the thing about a toll road is that it only works if there is no way around it. The moment there is a legal off-ramp, a rival store, an outside checkout, a link to pay somewhere cheaper, the toll stops being a wall and starts being a suggestion. And suggestions do not carry 70% margins. And the Google search deal, that beautiful $20 billion checkbox, was ruled part of an illegal monopoly in a United States courtroom. If a judge orders that payment to stop, Apple loses roughly a fifth of its services operating profit in a single stroke, and it loses it as pure profit, the most valuable dollars it has. There is no factory to sell, no cost to cut. It just evaporates. Then there is China, which is two separate loaded guns pointed from the same direction. A large share of Apple's manufacturing still runs through China, which means the supply chain sits on top of a geopolitical fault line that neither Apple nor anyone else controls. And China is also somewhere near a fifth of Apple's sales, a market where a homegrown competitor in a nationalist mood can erode the brand faster than any American analyst expects. One country sitting under both the factory floor and the cash register. That is not diversification. That is a single point of failure wearing two hats. Then there is the treadmill, which is the subtlest trap of all. The stock market prices Apple like a growth company with the rich multiple that implies. But strip away the buybacks and the toll, and the core is a mature hardware business selling into a saturated market where almost everyone who wants a smartphone already has one. As long as the story holds, the multiple holds. But the story requires a next act, a new platform, a new category, the next thing that reorders life the way the iPhone did. The headset was supposed to be it, and the market shrugged. A remarkable piece of engineering priced at $3,500 that sold in numbers you could almost count by hand, a product reviewers admired and returned. Artificial intelligence was supposed to be it, and Apple arrived late and stumbling, announcing a suite of intelligence features and then quietly delaying the ones that mattered. Watching rivals ship while its own assistant stayed the same half-deaf thing it had been for a decade. Each miss on its own is survivable. The pattern is the danger, because the entire premium multiple on the stock rests on the market's faith that this company still knows how to conjure the next indispensable thing out of nothing. And faith, once it starts to leak, is very hard to reinflate. Every quarter the iPhone flatlines without a successor is a quarter closer to the moment the market looks at Apple and re-rates it, not as the company that will invent the future, but as the very good, very profitable company that already invented its past. And notice the trap for anyone who thinks they can compete. You can build a better phone than Apple. Genuinely better, faster, cheaper, more open. And you will still lose because you are competing on the object, and the object was never the business. The customer isn't locked in by the phone. They're locked in by the photos, the messages, the friends with blue bubbles, the decade of accumulated life. You cannot out-engineer a moat made of other people's memories. That is why the most beautiful hardware in the world keeps dying against Apple. And why the smartest thing a rival ever did was not build a better phone, but build a different toll road entirely. So how does this end? Run it forward two ways. In the version that works, the flywheel keeps spinning. Apple settles or absorbs the regulation, pays the fines as a cost of doing business, and finds a way to keep the toll flowing even as the rules change around it. It moves enough manufacturing to India and Vietnam to defuse the China gun. And it finally lands the next platform, some fusion of artificial intelligence and hardware and health that becomes as unavoidable as the phone was, giving the installed base a new reason to stay and a new set of tolls to pay. The margin mix keeps tilting towards services, the buybacks keep shrinking the share count, and the compounding just continues, quietly, for another decade. The most valuable company in history simply stays the most valuable company in history, because a toll road with 2 billion users on it is the closest thing to a perpetual motion machine that capitalism has ever built. In the version that doesn't, the guns go off one at a time. A court kills the Google deal and a fifth of the best profit vanishes. Regulators force open the App Store, sideloading becomes normal, and the 30% toll erodes towards zero as developers root around it. China fractures, on the factory side or the sales side or both. And the next great product never arrives. The headsets gather dust, the AI stays a step behind, and the iPhone keeps selling but stops growing. And one ordinary quarter, the market finally does the thing it has resisted for years. It looks past the buybacks and the story and the aluminum, and it prices Apple as what the numbers say it might actually be. Not the company that will own tomorrow, but a superb, mature, slowly ordinary hardware company. The multiple compresses. Trillions in value quietly leave the building. Which of those two is the real future, nobody honestly knows. But here is the thing to hold on to, whichever way it breaks. Every part of the story you were told, the design, the taste, the genius, the objects worth queuing for in the rain, all of it is real and none of it is the point. The point was always the checkbox you never saw, the toll you never noticed, and the quiet, ruthless understanding